Hi, everyone, and welcome to Trade and Tariff Tuesdays. We're back with another edition of Avalara's webinar series discussing the Trump administration's tariffs and their impact on trade compliance. My name is Ashley, and I'll be your host. Before we dive in, I just have a couple housekeeping items. First, a friendly reminder that Avalara cannot provide legal or tax advice. On your screen is our safe harbor policy. Please take a moment to review that. We are recording today's event. You'll receive the recording later today. The console you're looking at can be customized. Feel free to move or resize the windows. The additional resources section contains a lot of great related resources, including the slide deck. There are several ways to engage with presenters and fellow attendees today. First, if you have any questions, please submit them using the Ask a Question box. We will save time at the end of the presentation for Q&A. And by popular demand, we are extending the time for this a little bit. We are going to stand for 45 minutes, so we have a little more time to answer questions. Second, you can join our attendee chat. There is an icon along the bottom of your screen with two chat bubbles. If you click that, the chat will appear on your screen. We encourage you to introduce yourself, network, and discuss today's topic. Third, you can react to the presentation by clicking on the emoji icon and reacting. Lastly, a reminder that this webinar is designed to be quick and interactive, so therefore it is not eligible for CPE credit. All right, let's meet today's presenters. We have a crew of Avalarans joining us today. So we have Craig Reed, General Manager of Cross-Border at Avalara, Patrick Frith, Senior Director of Growth for Cross-Border, George Trinchas, Senior Director of Global Marketplaces, and Scott Peterson, VP of Government Relations. So that is all I have for housekeeping. I will pass it over.
Well,
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, hey guys, good to be with you again, and lots to talk about. I always think on these things that we're going to run out of things to talk about, but we are supplied with a constant flow of news and developments. So it'll be good to talk about that. Especially some of the, Patrick, you and I have been at trade shows and customer conferences in the past couple of weeks. Would love to talk about that. So lots to talk about here. So we should probably dive right into it.
Okay, Craig, I think first up, we've got a poll question. Here it is. For those of you who've been paying attention to the news over the last few days, the question is, what is the current highest punitive tariff on Chinese imports? Four choices there, A, B, C, or D. I'll flick it over to the interactive slide so you can place your bets on what you think the highest punitive tariff on Chinese imports are. This is effective. I mean, it was effective immediately when it was put in place, so it's current. Just give you all a few moments. It's been changing a lot, so we'll see. And yes, so 59% of you are bang on, 145. 39.3% of you are just a couple of days behind the curve because...
Well, looking, Patrick, is a lot of people forget about the first two 10% bumps, right? There was 10%, then 10%, then the 125. So that's how we get to 145. But the 125 got a lot of news, but sometimes folks forget that there was 20% before that.
Yeah, added to. So I suppose technically the 125s are correct because there was the 10%, which made it 145. So yeah, everyone's a winner.
125
okay.
is what they have on what China has on the US, though. That's true.
Right. All right. So we move on then. So why are we in this place? Well, it's quite simple, really. Pre-February, so this is January time, it was fentanyl, it was counterfeit goods, and it was illegal immigrants. Stemming the flow of those three into the US is what set the stage for where we are today. And then we set about a timeline. And we've been recording the timeline since the 1st of February, which was when the big announcement was made. If you remember, it was China, it was Canada, it was Mexico. we've got 4 or 5 slides of timelines, so we're not doing all those anymore. You can go back to previous presentations and see those timelines. We sort of pick it up here in March. If you remember, early March, it seems like a lifetime ago, early March was when Canada and Mexico's 25% were paused by the administration here. There was some reciprocal and retaliatory action. If you remember, Canada imposed 25% on its second tranche of products imported from the US. So we saw Canada fight back with reciprocal tariffs. And we also started hearing mumbles about Liberation Day. And that did indeed take place on the 2nd of April. It was just a couple of weeks ago. On the 2nd of April, Craig and I were actually in Amsterdam on Liberation Day, and we had that presentation in the Rose Garden, if you all recall, where the worst offenders were singled out with reciprocal tariffs, and we've got a nice summary actually on the next slide to show what happened on Liberation Day. But before we get there, very quickly, subsequent to Liberation Day, we all saw the China-US escalation take place. It seemed to be every sort of 24 hours, there was a step up from both administrations. And then on the 9th of April, we saw the announcement that there was a 90-day pause on the most offending trade partners. So those reciprocal hikes announced on Liberation Day, they've been paused for 90 days. The 10% remains in place. Let's not forget that. And then we saw cell phones and other consumer electronics. It's around about 600 HS codes, which are given relief now from the Made in China announcements. You know, we'll talk more about HS codes later on, but very, very important. Cell phones got the attention, but there's actually other products as well, computing products. So HS codes vitally important to know if your products fall into that relief category or not. Okay, Liberation Day. So Craig, we were in Amsterdam. A lot of reaction to this, obviously, which we sort of soaked up whilst we were there for a couple of days.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the mood in the conference that we were at was interesting because Europe hadn't really, been a big part of it up until that point. So they're kind of getting caught up, you might say, and a lot of folks that we talked to who are from large corporations were deciding what they were going to do. I think the consensus was that we're just going to kind of wait and see what happens here. Absorb and use inventory that we've already got, and just take a bit of a wait and see approach as these things kind of play out. And that actually turned out to be a bit of a good strategy because, as we all know, everything's on pause for 90 days now. So all of these reciprocal tariffs that were announced in the Rose Garden are on pause for 90 days. Obviously, it's kind of interesting to watch the stock market. Took a big bump, then took another, downward turn, and it's kind of been up and down since then, just trying to absorb what this all means. And what it all means, we don't know. The administration has said, basically, we want to give time for the countries to come up with a deal or to do a deal with the administration. Whether that all gets done in 90 days, we don't know. Obviously, there's still a 10% baseline for these countries, so that's still in place. And then obviously the China tariffs are still in place as well. So that's kind of, well, we're gonna talk a bit more about that on the next slide. But that was the sentiment in Europe anyway. Was, wow, let's see what happens here. And turned out, like I said, to be a good strategy.
Yeah, that's right. So this is where we've sort of landed at the moment. China, obviously, the box. We're running out of space for China. We're going to have to steal some space from Mexico, I think. Yeah.
What's interesting is I was watching the Q&A box, and on the questions, there's a lot of folks who are rightly saying, no, the tariffs aren't 145%, they're 170 or they're 155 or they're, the different levels. You are correct. In fact, both are correct, because what we use the word is punitive on purpose. So it was the punitive tariffs that were on top of the existing tariffs that a lot of you pointed out. So, the punitive tariffs of 145 does not mean that that's the effective tariff, because the effective tariff could actually be considerably higher than that, depending on what the underlying good is and what the baseline tariff was before all this started.
Right, correct. And I see a comment here from Susan Eastling, which is absolutely spot on. The Section 301 tariffs, which have been in place for a number of years now, since 2018, they're still in place. So yeah. Whatever tariffs were slapped on then, this is all stackable. Everything's stackable. So the 145 is what catches the headline, of course, but this is all stackable depending on the products that you're importing. How do you know if you're subject to Section 301 or any other? It's your HS codes. Your HS code will tell you which column you lie in, and therefore how much duty you'll have to pay. A little bit about Canada. I know China has taken all the news, Craig, but your boots on the ground in Canada. Sort of.
Yeah. Well, right now, I think and I was actually just reading an article this morning that there's still a lot of confusion about what is complying with the USMCA, and there's also been a statement that auto parts or autos in general can get clawbacks for the percentage of U.S. content within a foreign-made automobile. But there's been no real guidance from CBP, at least that I could find, before we went to show here, that outlined those specific rules. So I would expect there's more to come there. But from a Canadian standpoint, really where we sit is 25% is the tariff, which is interesting because everyone else is at 10%. Canada and Mexico are at 25%, except for USMCA. And for Canada, that's just under 40% of goods. Mexico is just under 50% of goods. So there's still a lot of goods that are subject to that 25% tariff, except for energy and potash, which are at 10%. Canada still has reciprocal tariffs in place. I'm not sure yet whether or not they're going to increase that. I suspect that they won't, and given the 90-day pause, but we shall see. Mexico, same situation, except they haven't done any reciprocal tariffs. Both countries have taken an opposite approach. Canada chose to retaliate. Mexico did not, but they're still both in the same boat. So who knows what the right strategy is. As far as the others go, there is still the 25% on steel and aluminum, 25% on automobiles that I think, most people are aware of. It's certainly been in the press. And then 25% of countries that buy oil or gas from Venezuela. And then, as I mentioned, the 10% base on everyone else. So, and the reciprocal tariffs, I think the EU announced reciprocal tariffs, which they have subsequently put on hold in response to the US putting theirs on hold. So, this 90-day period should be interesting to see what, according to the US administration, there's a lineup of countries trying to negotiate. I guess we'll see, and maybe the announcements will trickle out. Maybe they'll, come all at once. Who knows? But that's where we stand now. Yeah.
I read the UK government is obviously preparing its response, as are many other countries. And they have drawn up a list of just over 8,000 products, which they intend to change the tariff on for US imports into the UK. So, 8,000 products is going to be around about 8,000 to 9,000 HS codes, I would have thought, which are going to be impacted. We don't know what they are yet. They haven't been announced, but that's what's being reviewed by the UK government. Rest assured that once that list of HS codes is announced formally, that won't be the headline, of course. The headline will be UK fights back, something like that. But beneath the headline will be the details, which is what we're interested in. We're interested in exactly what HS codes are going to be impacted, so we can then update our databases so they're effective 1 minute past midnight on the day which they come effective.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because the other element, the announcement of the chips, the semiconductors, the phones, the computers, et cetera, that that were announced as getting relief from the tariffs, those are all HS code based. So that's, it's really important to understand exactly what the HS codes are for those specific products that are going to get relief from the tariffs. Although I was reading another article that Trump said that there's more tariffs coming on semiconductors. So where that all shakes out, we don't know. But what we do know, to your point, Patrick, is that it's going to be HS code based. So knowing your HS codes are going to get is good. Well, obviously it's always critical, but it's going to be even more critical. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. But I think there's another big news item which doesn't get talked about as much, but certainly is equally as important.
Hey, great, Patrick.
Yeah. Go ahead.
We've had this question about 5 or 6 times. I wanted to. This is sort of the right slide for it, so I apologize breaking in there. But basically I'll sort of merge them all together. But it's is the de minimis removal for goods China, Hong Kong, country of origin, regardless of country of shipment, i.e., goods routed through UK. So can you answer that? And that's come up a bunch.
You know what? That's come up on every single. I forget which one we're on now for Tariff Tuesdays. I think we're on number 8, maybe number 9, but it comes up every time, and there's still a lot of confusion. So, just to be clear, and guys tack on, but point of origin does not matter. It is where the goods were made. It's the country of origin of the goods. It's where well, there's different rules for origin, but in general, it's where most of the value of the good was created. So in that example, George, if you ship from Mexico and you warehouse in UK and then ship from there to the US, it's still made. If the good was made in China, then it's still subject to the Chinese tariffs. It doesn't matter where it ships from. It could ship from Canada, Mexico, the UK, or anywhere in between. But if it's a Chinese-made good, it is subject to the tariffs. The other element of the China tariff that doesn't get talked about a lot, I just want to throw it in here as well, that was talked about at the NCD-FAA, which we're just at last week, is shipping. So any Chinese-made ship freighter that goods are delivered on are also subject to fees at the ports of between $500,000 and $1.5 million per ship, which gets added to the cost of the containers. So keep that in mind too. That doesn't get a lot of news either, but that's out there as well.
Yeah, and while we're talking about this, I think this has come up. I think there was a clarification: duty drawback. So if you bring something in at this 145% or as high as, depending on the category, maybe 245%, and you export it to a different country, correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe they clarified duty drawback is available on all the extended duties as well.
Yeah, they did that before they did the 145. So, they did say that duty drawback, there was a lot of questions about that because folks and a lot of brokers were very confused about that, whether or not there was drawback available. They did subsequently come out and say drawback is available. To my knowledge, they have not repealed that, meaning that drawback is still available. However, that was before the 145 and the escalation between China and the US. I don't know if it would apply to Chinese goods or not. But that, as far as I know, the drawback is still in place.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask a question to the group. If you can show a thumbs up or thumbs down, I think this would be a good idea. We're getting a lot of questions on how do I determine my duty. So, the webinar folks listening, if you want to see a demo of our 3CE tool that we acquired 4 or 5 years ago, which will show you real-time duties, show you the level of duty by country of import, and all sorts of other things. Sort of thumbs up or thumbs down in the window right now. We can show that on a future call to show you how duties are assessed by HS code or by product description as well. So I look forward to seeing what people want to see, because that's something I think would be really potentially a little more. A lot of
thumbs floating across the screen here. So I think that's probably yes. Well, so we'll try to do that next time around. Not sure if we would be able to get to it today. We can make it.
You know what we've got? We've got later in the slide deck, we'll get to it, is a screenshot of it. So it's not a working demo, it's just a screenshot. But if people are interested, when we get to that screenshot, we can do a demo next week.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think
okay.
the interesting part about this tool is, as Craig, and we can just show the screenshot, is it actually shows the stacking of the duties that have been applied by the, from country of origin and output. So we'll definitely show the question, the slideshow, and then maybe next week we'll figure out how to do a live version of this in the webinar.
Good idea. Okay, let's move on. So de minimis, George sort of teed us up there, and this is exactly it. Effective May 2nd. So today's the 15th of April. So we're talking 2 weeks from now, approximately. That's when the de minimis for China, Hong Kong goes away. Okay, it ends on the 2nd of May. So anything, including postal shipments, anything that comes through into the US from China or Hong Kong, or made in China and Hong Kong and shipped. So this Avalara t-shirt I'm wearing, this beautiful orange t-shirt, made in China, okay? If this logo was stitched on in a maquiladora in Mexico, that does not change the fact that this t-shirt is still a t-shirt or a polo shirt made in China. So it comes across the border from a maquiladoras into California on the back of a truck. It's cleared, but it's country of origin China. Therefore, despite the value, okay, this is obviously more than $0 in value, it will have duty imposed on it. So it's been around the world, it's ended up in Mexico, it's had a bit of stitching, and it comes into California from Mexico. It will still have duty applied to it. So that's the 2nd of May. Postal, non-postal, it's all going to be treated. There's going to be duty applied, regardless of wherever it comes from. So just to tie up that point, and it's a very important point, because as we all know, if you just look around yourself, in your homes, in your offices, wherever you may be, you're surrounded by made in China products, right? So this is impactful at a household level, at an office level. Everyone is going to be impacted. So
I know, Craig, you brought this up yesterday internally. So what does an importer have to do to prove that the ship left port on time? I think that's a question that's come up a couple of times. I know we've had some readings from different groups. Maybe answer what you're hearing and learning about that.
Yeah, you have to prove, so to your point, you have to prove the date it left port. And to my knowledge, there's been a lot of confusion about that, because there's nowhere in the system to declare that. So what I'll say is that there's a lot of confusion in the industry and across the broker community, at least that I'm aware of, on how exactly you prove that. Just that, you do need to prove it. You need to prove when it left port in order to say, hey, we left port before these duties went into place. But the system itself, as I understand it, doesn't really make it easy to do that. So, that's a bit of an outstanding view in the community.
Yeah. Okay. Implications to your business. So this is the second. And Craig, you wanted to. We've got a new slide here, because we kind of boiled it down.
Yeah, I kind of, I was thinking about this, and I was like, we talk about tariffs, but really, what are the four horsemen of global trade? What are the key elements? We just talked about de minimis, and what we didn't mention is that on postal shipments, it's been raised kind of in lockstep with the tariffs that have gone up in China. But the de minimis exemption is one big piece of it. So the threshold at which duty and taxes are charged. Obviously now for China, that's going away May 2nd. Every other country of manufacture is $800. So that's still in place for other countries. The tariff code classification, the actual classification code, or HS code as commonly called, is the other element that drives it. We saw that with computers and tablets, phones, etc. They have to belong to a specific HS code to get relief. The retaliatory tariffs by Canada that the EU was proposing are all tariff code based, so the HS code is the basis of that. We've just talked about country of origin and how that matters relative to country of shipment. So, if it's made in China, it doesn't matter where it ships from. That's what matters. And then lastly, which we haven't talked about, is declared value. So, a lot of folks who are bringing imports, they're declaring value. And sometimes folks, and I know I've been in this industry a long time, not obviously condoning this, but I do know that sometimes, folks will monkey with declared value to try to reduce their overall duty exposure. Don't do that. Make sure that you can back up your declared value and your cost, whether it's cost of goods or a retail sale. You have to be able to declare value. You have to be able to back it up to the CBP. So those are the core elements of global trade, and really what drives everything. The tariffs are, what sits on top of that, based on the tariff code classification, the country of origin, the declared value, whether it's exempt or not. Those are really the key variables to keep in mind, guys.
So fair to say, Craig, whether you're an importer or an exporter, and you're trying to navigate this changing landscape, this minefield, this tariff minefield that we find ourselves in, to get yourself through, you need all 4 pieces of data for your shipments.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually, when we were in Amsterdam, some of the manufacturers we were talking to said, we've got a lot of inventory. We don't even know the country of origin because it's been sitting there a long time. So, that's a tricky thing for folks. So, and this next slide comes from discussions at the NCBFAA. We talked to a lot of brokers. There's a lot of news coming out. These rules are changing so quickly. Boy, these folks are bearing the brunt of it. And I had a lot of brokers I talked to are just like pulling their hair out, working crazy hours just to keep on top of this stuff. So these rules are changing quickly. There's other ways to figure it out, just other than calling your broker. They're awfully busy folks right now. Make sure you know your classification. Like we said, make sure you know your origin. Again, be careful. I'm just going to say the broker industry in general is just getting overwhelmed. So, try to do your own research if you can. Brokers, are trying to keep on top of things, but, I'm just kind of giving them an olive branch that they're trying to stay on top of it too. And a lot of it is because folks are just so confused. They're calling their broker saying, hey, what do I do? Oftentimes, the brokers don't even have clear answers yet because the CBP hasn't clarified things yet. So these are sort of the key things to keep in mind. The tariff rules are changing quickly. Make sure you know your classification. Make sure you know your origin. If you're going to use USMCA, make sure you know your HS codes and whether you qualify for content. The legal and financial risk, it's really up to you as the importer. Brokers are there to help, but ultimately you need to make sure your information is correct. And then, timing is really everything. So be careful when you're released from port. If these tariffs change overnight, that could get you in a tricky situation. So make sure you know what your freight timing is going to be when you hit the border. So those are all kind of things that are hitting the brokerage community right now. A lot of things, like I said, we're hearing at NCBFAA, which is the National Customs Broker and Forwarders Association of America. Like I said, these are the folks in the front lines, and they're trying to do everything they can just keep their heads above water. So go easy on your brokers.
Yeah, absolutely. Just another anecdote from Amsterdam. We spoke to a equipment manufacturer in Europe, and he was sending heavy duty equipment. The contracts were signed. It was $5 million worth of equipment sending over to the US. The deal had already been done, and equipment was not on the water yet. Was about to go on the water just after Liberation Day, and guess what? 20% duty, reciprocal duty, was about to be applied to that product. It's going to hit the US. It's going to arrive somewhere on the east coast of the US. 20% on a $5 million value shipment is $1 million. Somebody has to find.
Yeah, who's going to pay that, right?
It's not in the contract. It's not in the agreement because it wasn't a thing, right? But then it was. So you can see the confusion. This is, but not just the confusion. Ultimately, somebody has to pay it, unless you abandon it at port, of course. There's extra money has to be found to pay for these duties.
Well, speaking of, we talked about duties, but there's also another element of it, which our good friend Scott Peterson's here to talk about, which is sales tax. Scott.
Thank you, Craig. Appreciate it. On Sunday, I was reading this article about tariffs, and they quoted this young man who had bought something, and there was a line on the invoice that said it was $72 for tariff surcharge. And he was complaining because, and he said this in the article, was, I thought tariffs were imposed on the country. And I'm sitting there reading this, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, you sound like one of my cousins. But what he didn't comment was the invoice that he showed, the tariff was above the line and when above the sales tax. And when I did the math, it was easy. That retailer had charged sales tax not only on the product that was being shipped into and the shipping and handling along with that, but the tariff itself. And that's what's important. Every state's sales tax is imposed upon the retail sales price. Then they're almost exactly alike from state to state to state. And they, in addition to being exactly alike, they have one rule, and the one rule is that you cannot, as a retailer, you cannot deduct anything from your sales price unless it is specifically stated in that state's law. There is no state law anywhere in the United States that exempts or allows a retailer to deduct tariffs from the retail selling price. So every time one of these things is passed along, either whether it's built into the price of the product or added as a separate surcharge, it should be part of that retailer's sales price and upon which the sales tax is applied.
Wow. So that, nobody really talks about that, right? Like all the news is around the tariffs, but that really bumps up the price to the consumer of the good overall is, now you're adding state sales tax on top of the tariffs. No, that's just, you're showing the 10% example there, Scott, but
yes.
You go 20 or 20% or 30%, that's another 12%, or 1.2%, I guess, or 3%, depending on what the tariff is of cost tax to the consumer, right?
Yeah, we're pyramiding taxes, which is every economist will tell you the last thing you want to do is pyramid taxes, but that's what happens with tariffs. Tariffs get built into the price of the product, which is then subject to a secondary tax. Basic tax economics is being violated.
Well,
and Scott, we had a couple of questions come in, and so from a basic tax perspective, a tariff increases the cost of goods. So how would you? We're not going to give specific advice here because everything changes. But if you don't increase the cost of the goods and you add a surcharge like we did here, it's fully taxable. So if you're increasing the tax of good, if you're increasing the cost of goods, naturally the taxes go up. So you're sort of you're doomed if you do or doomed if you don't, depending on how you want to show it. So short term, you might want to put a tariff surcharge on. Long term, you're going to have to build this in price.
And there was a period of time a few years ago where we had a really big spike in fuel costs. And there were a lot of retailers that were putting a transportation surcharge on their invoice to help them recover the cost of shipping. And I think there was like one state in the country that said that transportation surcharge wasn't taxable, but that was a very specific state and for a very specific reason. Every other state said surcharges are part of the sales price.
Yeah,
wow,
and taxable.
So why don't we talk about how to solve these problems, guys?
Yeah. Let's move on. So as a summary then, implications to your business, shipments getting held up in customs. Think about that $5 million worth of equipment that's heading its way to the East Coast right now. It's going to get held up because they're trying to find the money. Penalties and fines for non-compliance. Yes, there are rules. There's legislation in place to penalize and fine companies who are non-compliant. That's not just the US, that's everywhere in the world. So yes, they do exist. Enforceability, we'll have to wait and see how they get enforced. Under and overcharging customs duty, so important. Not to under, not to over, to get it right on the money, get it right on the penny, not a penny more, not a penny less, pay the exact amount of duty and import taxes which is owed. And then the final point, obviously, is poor customer experience. We were just talking before the call went live. One of our team members has got a shipment coming in from overseas. It's held up. For her, it's a poor customer experience. She's getting a delay. She wants that item to make use of it, but it's been held up at customs for tariff-related reasons. So it's going to be hitting all of us one way or another.
Yeah, and here's some of the things we heard from customers, from partners, that in the folks that we've talked to over our trade shows and just conversations that we've had, is that here's what we see folks were doing. One is diversifying. Shipping carriers are finding different sources of supply. Obviously, that's challenging since the tariffs are moving all over the place. Two is to automate global trade compliance so they don't have to worry about staying up to date. We'll talk a bit about that in a moment. Working with a customs broker, leaning on their expertise. I think a lot of folks are choosing to do that with the uncertainty that's going on. But again, as I said earlier, they're just getting really overwhelmed. Number four, which you should always be doing, is making sure your product details are compliant. So you've got the correct country of origin, your HS codes, your value for duty, and you can prove that. And then the other thing that we're hearing is building inventory to absorb short-term headwinds. Whether or not you can do that depends on your situation probably. And one that's maybe missing here is just to try to absorb things into the margin short-term and wait it out. But those are the things that we're hearing. So kind of curious what you folks who are attending today are doing. So we've got a poll question coming up here. Yeah. How are you planning to adjust your supply chain? And we've been tracking this over our webinars, just kind of trend out what folks are doing. A lot of folks don't know yet, but we're starting to see some movement into some of the other buckets. But if you could take a moment to answer that, that'd be great. All right, just give everyone a couple of moments here. I think it's probably going to be relatively the same, right? Okay, yeah, I don't know yet is number one. It has been number one, and maybe actually that's increased a bit from before. And I wonder if that's because of the tariff, the Rose Garden tariffs, and then or Liberation Day tariffs, and then the pause. It's just like, I don't know yet because I want to wait and see what happens with, did my suppliers manage to, the countries I'm getting supply from manage to renegotiate. So I think, I don't know yet, I'm not surprised it's kind of jumping, but this gives you a sense of where folks have been as we've been asking them, but pretty consistent that folks don't really know what to do, which I think reflects a lot of what we're hearing in the industry is just uncertainty. There's so much uncertainty. Folks can't make decisions. They don't want to make decisions because they don't know where everything's going to land and where the dust is going to settle. So until that dust settles, I think we're going to continue to see that.
Yeah, absolutely right. We broke, I don't know yet, broke 50% for the first time today. So 55%. And I think you're absolutely right, Craig. I think the pause is impacting that camp because let's see what happens over 90 days. Who comes back with what? Who gets a deal? Who doesn't get a deal? And then when I know all the facts, then I can plan for the rest of the year. For 2026, I can plan my supply chain, my demand. So my contract agreement.
Patrick, I'm going to ask you a question. We've had this come in a couple of times. Put on your former DHL hat. What are the differences between truck, air, ocean tariff implications? I think there's a couple thoughts. I have mine. I'll let you start.
So when it hits the border, when it arrives at a seaport, an airport, or a land border, it makes no difference. It's entering the country at that moment. The load is the load, whatever the products are, wherever they were made. So it makes absolutely no difference. What will make a difference is when that vehicle to the US was sent. So the ship, obviously, if you think about a ship coming from Asia, let's say 20 days, could be 25 days, could be 30 days, somewhere around there. If it left on a day that preceded a tariff change, then if you can prove that ship left port at the port of origin on that day, then you can avoid these duties. Obviously, an aircraft takes 14 hours to get in from Asia. So that it leaves on the day or the day before that it arrives. a lot easier to calculate. So you know, the departure date varies, but when it hits the border, that's when it's going to get assessed. So,
and the other thing changes is the clearance type. So you might have a commercial air clearance or an express if you use an express carrier. So it pre-clears in the country. It goes right to, so DHL, FedEx, UPS use this methodology, ship it to Memphis. It is not going through a customs broker at that point. It's going directly to the consumer on the next train, plane, however they're moving it.
Yeah,
this is really the key thing. Postal clearances are going to slow you down in this new world. So if you're worried about customer expectations, make sure you're looking at your clearance methodology and the brokers you're using for a port, a seaport or a postal clearance right now.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think, you know, the other question I saw, I'll let the folks read the question on the poll question on the screen, but the other thing is who pays it depends on the Incoterms, right? So, you know, whether it's FOB or CIF, whatever is negotiated is really what determines who's going to end up paying that. But it is assessed at the border. That's the key point.
Okay, so another poll question then. So what are your plans to address the increased costs from global tariffs? We thought this was interesting because we've heard in the market, we've heard quite a few different responses. Are you going to pass it along to the customer? Just as Scott mentioned, are you going to include a tariff surcharge, which we've also seen? Will you absorb the cost? Can your margins support it? Or if not, then just write a note in the group chat, give you a few moments there. Yeah,
we thought we were originally at 30 minutes for this, and then we went to 45, and now we're running out of time. Maybe we'll be at an hour before we get everything done. Wow, so 50% are passing it on, and the surcharge. So almost everyone is going to add something.
Right. Wow. Yeah. Yeah, it would suggest then only about 11%, 10 or 11% here have got the margin to absorb it. Maybe they planned for this, maybe they were visionary, who knows, but they plan to absorb it, whereas the rest are going to pass it on, which is what we expected, yeah. Okay, taking action, let's just wrap it up here quickly. Yes, you can do all this yourself. You can read the White House bulletins every single morning. You can read the announcements made by other countries as they announce their reciprocals, and you know, you can plot it all in a spreadsheet, etc., or you can just turn to automation. We stay up at night to make sure that tariffs are in place on the 1 minute past midnight, so you don't have to, which means that our systems are up to date. You need your HS codes, you need your values, just the 4 horsemen that Craig pointed out. That's what you need. And I did say we were going to give you a screenshot. Here is a screenshot of how you can self-serve. You can calculate the duties yourself. You see here in this example, we've got a shipment which is the importing country is Canada. It's coming from China. We've worked out its HS code. That's right there in the middle. And then you can see by just a click of the mouse, you can see the duties of that particular product into Canada from various countries. So this is all available at your fingertips. You don't have to wait until Tariff Tuesdays to find out what the duty impact is. You can find out whenever you want by using that self-serve classification.
Just kind of tack on to that, Patrick. This is just one example. This is our self-serve tool. We've got a bunch of others for tariff classification. We've got tools for duty and tax calculations, for restrictions, for content, for trade content, so that, you know, we have all those tools available to you. We have a number of different APIs and connections to popular platforms and ERPs. So we help you get integrated, or there's, you know, obviously API methods as well. And, you know, we have had so many questions. We have so many people coming to us that, you know, really the best way to get to the front of the line is whether or not you'd like to talk to us about this. If you want to contact us, please say yes, and we'll make sure that somebody gets to you. We run out of time every time on these things. We hope to get to more Q&A, but we didn't. But if you do have a lot of questions and you're thinking about how you're going to respond, then I'd encourage you to do this versus maybe contact your customs broker because they're a little overwhelmed right now. So anyway, guys, any last minute comments or any questions, George, that popped up that we should cover before we sign off?
A lot of questions about drawback, de minimis, how those things are. I think one that I'll address real quickly is 90. It's hard to say the percentage, but digital goods generally are not tariffed or dutied because there is no physical shipping. There are some very clear exceptions in the software world where there's physical goods that ship with those. So maybe a manual. Who's using a CD-ROM anymore? I don't know, but they do have some specific call-outs for those things in the tariff rules. And so I think we probably should show a better description of what how this software works maybe next time or 2 times in the future. And then there's a lot. I mean, I apologize, guys. I was trying to answer questions as fast as possible. There was over 200 questions asked, and myself and one of the persons were trying to get to them as fast as possible. So I think I got through about a quarter of, if not half, the questions and trying to group them together. So I apologize.
Yeah, well, maybe, the folks that we didn't get to, we'll follow up with you after the webinar. And again, we're going to be doing this weekly, so we'll be here again next Tuesday. So if you'd like to join us then, we'll do a little more, as George said, about demoing some of the software we have available. Again, HS codes, duty and tax calculations, restrictions, content are all things that we do. So, depending on what you need, likely we have a solution for you, but feel free to answer yes to the poll question, and we'll get somebody in touch with you to discuss how we might be able to solve some of your problems. Folks, thanks for your attendance. Thanks for your patience. We're a couple minutes over, and apologies again if we didn't get to your questions, but we will follow up after the show. Thanks again, and we'll see you next Tuesday.
Thank you.
Everyone, just as a reminder, we are extending this to 45 minutes. If it's already on your calendar, we can't retroactively update your calendar, so just make a mental note of that. But if you register for sessions going forward, the new time duration should be reflected on your calendar. We do have a lot of resources out there, as mentioned, so be sure to check those out between now and next Tuesday. You will receive a post-event email later today with a link back to the console where you can access the recording, the slide deck, get those additional resources, and we hope you can join us again next week. So that concludes today's webinar. Thank you.